In the waning years of the 4th century, the Roman Empire was a realm of divided power and shifting loyalties. Eudoxia, born of Frankish nobility, possessed a beauty and ambition that would soon captivate the eastern capital. Her father was the powerful Frankish general, Flavius Bautu, a man of considerable influence in the Roman military. Orphaned at a young age, she was brought to Constantinople, the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. She was raised in the household of a prominent military leader, a common fate for the children of Germanic chieftains in Roman service. The reigning emperor in the East, Arcadius, was a man known more for his piety and weakness than for his political acumen. His court was a viper's nest of intrigue, dominated by the powerful and corrupt eunuch, Eutropius. Eutropius, the Grand Chamberlain, sought to solidify his power by arranging a marriage for the emperor. He intended for Arcadius to marry his own chosen candidate, a match that would secure his influence over the throne. However, Eutropius had underestimated the allure and cunning of Eudoxia. Others at court, rivals to Eutropius, saw an opportunity to unseat the powerful chamberlain. They showed Emperor Arcadius a portrait of the beautiful Frankish noblewoman. Arcadius was immediately smitten by her image, captivated by her reported grace and striking features. The plans of Eutropius were swiftly overturned in a surprising turn of courtly maneuvering. On April 27, 395, Eudoxia married Emperor Arcadius, becoming his empress. Her coronation was a grand affair, a spectacle of imperial power and splendor in the magnificent city of Constantinople. Eudoxia quickly proved to be more than just a beautiful consort. She was intelligent, strong-willed, and deeply interested in the exercise of power. Her influence over the pliable Arcadius grew daily, eclipsing that of the ministers and officials who once guided him. She gave the emperor 5 children, including the future Emperor Theodosius II, securing the dynastic succession. On January 9th, 400, she was officially granted the title of Augusta, a formal recognition of her immense power. As Augusta, she could wear the imperial purple and her image could be circulated on official coinage. Her authority was now second only to the emperor himself, a fact she did not hesitate to use. Meanwhile, a new force had arrived in Constantinople in 397. John, a priest from Antioch, was reluctantly consecrated as the Archbishop of Constantinople. He was a man of fierce asceticism and unparalleled oratorical skill, soon to be known as Chrysostom, the golden-mouthed. John Chrysostom looked upon the opulence and moral laxity of the imperial court with disdain. His sermons, delivered from the pulpit of the Hagia Sophia, were fiery condemnations of wealth and vanity. Preached charity, humility, and a return to spiritual purity. The wealthy elite of Constantinople, accustomed to a compliant clergy, were scandalized by his rebukes. They felt the sting of his words, which seemed to target their extravagant lifestyles directly. Empress Eudoxia, a woman who reveled in the splendor of her position, felt particularly singled out. She saw John's denunciations of luxurious dress and cosmetics as a personal affront. The tension between the imperial palace and the patriarchal residence began to simmer. John was uncompromising, refusing to temper his message to appease the powerful. Eudoxia was proud, unwilling to tolerate what she perceived as a public challenge to her authority and lifestyle. Conflict was not merely personal. It represented a struggle for influence over the soul of the capital. Several high-ranking clergymen, envious of John's position, saw an opportunity in the growing rift. Chief among them was Theophilus, the powerful and unscrupulous patriarch of Alexandria. The breaking point came in 403 with the dedication of a silver statue of the Empress. This statue, a symbol of her power and prestige, was erected on a porphyry column near the cathedral. The dedication ceremonies were loud and theatrical, filled with pagan-style revelry that disturbed the sacred services within the Hagia Sophia. John Chrysostom was incensed by the disruption and the cult-like veneration of the Empress's image. He ascended his pulpit and delivered a blistering sermon, though its exact words are debated by historians. Tradition holds that he began with the inflammatory line, "Again, Herodias rages. Again she is troubled. She dances again, and again desires to receive John's head in a charger." The comparison of Eudoxia to the wicked queen who had John the Baptist beheaded was an unforgivable insult. Word of the sermon flew to the palace, and the Empress's fury was boundless. She now had the public justification she needed to move against the troublesome archbishop. Eudoxia and Theophilus convened a council of bishops hostile to John. This gathering, held on an estate across the Bosphorus, became known as the Synod of the Oak. It was a kangaroo court, designed with the sole purpose of deposing John Chrysostom. A list of dubious charges was compiled against him, ranging from heresy to treason. John refused to recognize the legitimacy of the synod and did not attend to defend himself. The Synod of the Oak swiftly condemned and deposed him in his absence. Emperor Arcadius, guided by his wife, ratified the verdict and ordered John into exile. In the summer of 403, soldiers escorted the beloved archbishop from his church. The people of Constantinople, who adored their golden-mouthed preacher, were thrown into a state of uproar. They saw his exile as a grave injustice, a victory of corrupt power over righteousness. Riots broke out in the streets as the populace demanded the return of their spiritual father. As John was being spirited away by ship, a sudden and violent event shook the city. Some sources claim it was an earthquake. Others call it a mishap in the imperial bedchamber, possibly a miscarriage. The superstitious Eudoxia was terrified, interpreting the event as a clear sign of divine wrath. She believed God was punishing her for the exile of his holy servant. Panicked, she rushed to Arcadius, her imperial pride shattered by fear. She begged her husband to rescind the order of exile immediately. "Our empire will not prosper unless we recall John," she is said to have cried. Arcadius, ever compliant, dispatched a messenger to bring the archbishop back. John's return to Constantinople was a moment of unparalleled triumph. Crowds thronged the streets, cheering and singing psalms as he made his way back to the Hagia Sophia. He was carried aloft on the shoulders of his adoring flock, a living symbol of righteousness vindicated. Eudoxia herself wrote him a letter, feigning piety and claiming she was innocent of his banishment. A fragile and insincere peace settled over the capital. But the fundamental conflict between the Empress and the Archbishop remained unresolved. John could not remain silent in the face of what he saw as sin and corruption. Eudoxia could not tolerate a subject who so openly defied her imperial will. The truce lasted only a few months, a brief interlude in a war of ideologies. The Empress and her allies began plotting once more, determined to be rid of John permanently. They argued that his return without the formal reversal of his deposition by a church council was uncanonical. This legalistic argument provided the new pretext for his removal. Another council was convened in early 404, this time in Constantinople itself. The atmosphere was tense, with the city divided into two hostile camps. John's supporters and his enemies clashed in the streets, and violence became commonplace. The council, packed with John's opponents, once again decreed his deposition. This time, the authorities were determined to enforce the verdict without delay. On the eve of Easter in 404, the emperor's soldiers stormed the cathedral. The sacred space was filled with catechumens awaiting baptism. The soldiers interrupted the holy rites, and the baptismal waters were reportedly stained with blood. It was an act of shocking sacrilege that horrified the Christian world. John was placed under house arrest, confined to his residence. For 2 months, he remained a prisoner while the city seethed with tension. Finally, on June 20th, 404, the order for his second exile was carried out. He was to be sent to the remote and desolate town of Caucasus, high in the mountains of Armenia. His departure was quiet, managed carefully to avoid a repeat of the public outcry. As the archbishop began his long and arduous journey, a fire broke out in the Hagia Sophia. The great cathedral, along with the nearby Senate house, was consumed by flames. John's supporters were blamed for the arson, leading to a brutal persecution. Eudoxia had finally won. Her great adversary was gone. The city was hers. The church was now led by a compliant patriarch, and her power was absolute. But her victory was fleeting and shadowed by tragedy. Just a few months later, on October 6th, 404, the empress suffered a fatal hemorrhage. Some sources say it was the result of a miscarriage or a stillbirth. Her death was sudden and agonizing, cutting her down at the height of her power. Many in Constantinople saw her demise as the final act of divine judgment. It was the ultimate retribution for her persecution of John Chrysostom. The empress who had fought so fiercely for worldly glory was gone. John Chrysostom, meanwhile, endured his exile with courage and grace. On the harsh outpost of Caucasus, he continued to write letters, influencing the church from afar. He remained a potent symbol of resistance against the abuse of power. His captors, perhaps on orders from Constantinople, forced him on a death march to an even more remote location. He died on this journey in 407, his last words being, "Glory be to God for all things." History, largely written by the church, would not be kind to Aelia Eudoxia. She was cast as the villain, the Jezebel to John's Elijah. Her ambition and pride were seen as the cause of a great schism and the suffering of a saint. The story of her conflict with John Chrysostom became a cautionary tale. It was a stark reminder of the perennial struggle between temporal and spiritual power. Eudoxia's silver statue, the symbol of her vanity, was eventually torn down. Her name became synonymous with worldly arrogance and impiety. In contrast, John Chrysostom was venerated as a martyr and one of the great doctors of the church. Decades later, in 438, Eudoxia's own son, Emperor Theodosius II, would make amends. He had the relics of John Chrysostom brought back to Constantinople in a solemn procession. The emperor himself knelt before the coffin, publicly asking for forgiveness on behalf of his parents. It was a posthumous victory for the golden-mouthed preacher. The legacy of Aelia Eudoxia remains complex and debated. Was she a power-hungry tyrant or a capable ruler defending her imperial authority? Was she a vain and frivolous woman or a patron of the arts and a devoted mother? Her actions were driven by the political realities of her time. She sought to secure her position and the future of her dynasty. Her methods were often ruthless, but not unusual for the era. The empress lived in a world where power was a constant, dangerous game. She played that game with skill and determination, but ultimately lost to the judgment of history. Her conflict with John was a clash of two unyielding personalities. Both were convinced of their own righteousness. Neither was willing to compromise for the sake of peace. The empress believed in the divine right of her imperial station. Archbishop believed in the supreme moral authority of the church. Their collision was perhaps inevitable in an age of profound social and religious transformation. Eudoxia's reign marked a significant moment in the evolution of the empress's role. She wielded a level of direct political power that few of her predecessors had enjoyed. She set a precedent for future empresses who would rule alongside, or even through, their husbands. Her story is a vivid illustration of the turbulent politics of the late Roman court. It reveals the intricate dance of influence between the palace, the military, and the church. The echoes of her struggle with John Chrysostom would resonate for centuries. It highlighted the unresolved question of who held ultimate authority in a Christian empire. The Empress's life was a brilliant but brief flame in the twilight of Rome. She rose from obscurity to the pinnacle of power through wit and will. She adorned Constantinople with her presence and patronage. She fought to define her own authority against a formidable opponent. She gave birth to an heir who would rule for 4 decades. Yet, she is primarily remembered for her feud with a single, unbending priest. The narrative of her life was captured and shaped by her enemies. They painted her as a persecutor, a vain woman who defied God's servant. This portrayal has dominated the historical record for over 16 centuries. A more nuanced view sees her as a product of her time, a ruler fighting for her place in a man's world. Her Frankish origins may have made her an outsider in the sophisticated court of Constantinople. This might have fueled her desire to assert her authority so forcefully. She used the tools available to her, her influence over her husband, court alliances, and the symbolism of imperial power. The silver statue was not just vanity, it was a political statement. It declared her status as Augusta and her role as a protector and benefactor of the city. John's opposition was therefore not just a moral critique, but a political challenge. He was questioning her right to define public space and command public veneration. In the end, Eudoxia's direct, confrontational approach failed. She succeeded in exiling the man, but not his message or his influence. His martyrdom only amplified his voice and sanctified his cause. Eudoxia's death so soon after her apparent victory seemed to confirm this. It was a narrative too powerful to overcome. Divine justice had been served. The tale of the Empress and the Archbishop became a foundational story for the Byzantine Church. It defined the ideal relationship between church and state, with the church as the conscience of the empire. Eudoxia, for all her power, was cast as the eternal antagonist in this sacred drama. Her life serves as a powerful reminder of how history is written by the victors. And in the long war of narratives, the saint outlasted the empress. The golden mouth of Chrysostom proved more enduring than the golden palaces of Eudoxia. The memory of her reign is forever intertwined with the echoes of his fiery sermons. Her ambition carved a space for powerful women in the Roman world. Her legacy was ultimately defined by the man she tried, and failed, to silence.